Hi, and welcome to Extraordinary Pursuits, a podcast from BIP Ventures. I'm your host, Rochelle Kuramoto. Join me each week for masterclasses and conversations about the skills and experiences that matter most to startups in the innovation economy. You will hear from subject matter experts and founders. We're here to inspire, inform, and occasionally even entertain you. Let's get started. On our podcast today, we are joined by David Rudolph, the CEO of PlayOn, which is a cutting-edge technology company that has revolutionized how people connect, engage, and experience digital content. Under David's leadership, PlayOn has become not a, but the central source for high school fan engagement. It encompasses everything from the ticketing process to streaming events. Their innovation has revolutionized how we experience high school sports. David joins us to share his experience leading a company through hypergrowth. He explains how it happened and how the company went from chasing that growth to harnessing it to literally transform the company from a startup to the sector leader. David's entrepreneurial achievements have earned him recognition among the industry's most dynamic executives, and I think you'll understand why as you listen to this interview. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Extraordinary Pursuits, a podcast from BIP Ventures. Today, we are incredibly fortunate to have with us David Rudolph. He is the CEO of one of our portfolio companies, PlayOn. And this company is extraordinary because it has experienced hypergrowth. And that is what we are going to talk about today. So, David, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
So before we get started with the story that I think a lot of our listeners are going to be very excited to hear, let's, kind of hear a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what made you an entrepreneur. Were you born that way?
Yeah, no, I think growing up, I didn't even know what entrepreneurship was. I mean, just to date myself, I was born in the early 70s, and so kind of grew up through the amazing 80s. And I think the word entrepreneurship was floating around, but I grew up in a pretty small town in Tennessee. My dad ran a family business that he took over from his dad. So I think there was certainly a path that if that's what I wanted to do, that was available. And that's a form of entrepreneurship. But that was kind of the only context that I had. So, but no, I wouldn't say I went to college with the design of someday being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So what did you study?
I went to Georgia Tech. That's how I got to Atlanta.
Okay.
And I studied industrial engineering, which, a lot of folks call imaginary engineering, which is a little bit true. It's not quite the most rigorous discipline of engineering like mechanical or civil or electrical. But I knew I wanted to go into business. Like that was my interest. And what industrial engineering is great about is it's very statistics based. So there's all the math and the science and all that behind it. But and so I did a minor in economics and a minor in finance as well. So that's what led me into the business. And I think once I started working, I quickly realized that I was wired a little bit different than some of the other folks I was working with at the big company. So that's where I knew at some point I was going to start a company or work at an early stage company.
So let me guess, when you say wired differently, you were seeing problems and compelled to fix them?
Right. Yeah. I had this, it drove me crazy to not fix them. And it drove me crazy that other people didn't see that way. And I think it was also just, I had a much higher risk tolerance than those around me. So, I mean, other folks were really worried about well, what if it fails and what's the impact on my career? And I was like, but what if it succeeds? I viewed problems differently than a lot of the other folks around me.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And, when we talk to entrepreneurs, we hear very familiar stories. So, you definitely found your people. So what was the problem that inspired you to create PlayOn? Of all of the things you could have done with that background, why PlayOn?
Yeah, I love founder stories because there's always, the element of truth, but there's always a little bit of fiction that creeps in there. So the listeners will have to figure out what's true in this one. But again, from my biased perspective, the vast majority of this is true. Actually, the spark of it is 100% true. So I was working at Turner Broadcasting. That's where I started when I graduated from Georgia Tech. That's where I started. And this was still a little bit in the era of Ted Turner. So it very much had that flavor of Ted was ready, fire, aim, and he wasn't running the day-to-day operations, but he was around. And so, you could kind of feel his spirit in the company. And I was in a corporate role and responsible for a couple of different areas. It wasn't probably the best fit for what I wanted to do, but it was a great job. And one weekend, there was a Georgia Tech at UNC football game that ended up not being on TV. And this is before I had kids. I think recently married because my wife had thrown a birthday party for me on the same day. And it really annoyed me that I couldn't watch the game. And so during the birthday party, I was on my cell phone with a friend of mine who was at the game. And as we hung up, I said, why didn't you take a video camera and stream the game so that I could watch it? Now, this is before YouTube, and this is before it wasn't even technically possible at the time. But I came in the next day and I had a group that this was their responsibility, was to figure out unmet consumer needs in the media market. And I said, hey guys, here's what I would do. I want to figure out a way to produce and distribute untelevised live sports events. And that was about 20 years ago when we started working on it. So,
wow, that's
here we are
amazing.
today.
So it all started with a birthday present that you didn't get.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. I love it. Okay. I'm going to choose that is the actual true story. I love it. So it's a great story. Tell us a little bit about PlayOn. Obviously you said it's 20 years old. I would imagine it's not the company it started as, but give us a little bit of the history and where you are now.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, like the kind of the genesis was to figure out how to produce and distribute untelevised live sports. The good thing in that 20-year journey, that hasn't changed at all. Like
awesome.
We are still on that mission. Where I would add to that is just a couple of extra words. I would say we want to produce, distribute, and monetize untelevised live events. So we had to figure out the business model. That was one part of the journey. And then as we evolved, so this was, the first 5 years or so of the company's history was inside of Turner. And then I think I had my midlife professional crisis early. I quit my job. We had just had our first child. My wife was pregnant with our second child, and I decided that was a great time to leave my comfy corporate job and go do something different.
Yep.
It also happened to coincide with the 2008 financial crisis. So if anyone ever wants to get timing advice, I'm not the one to go to.
Well, you had a really big imperative to survive.
Yes, it put a lot of pressure. Like most startups, I had dreams of we're going to take that platform and do a bunch of different things, bunch of different applications. And what became clear very quickly within the first 6 months, if we didn't pick a vertical, if we didn't pick an application for this, we were going to end up doing nothing very well. We were going to get critical mass. So within that first year, we landed in on high school sports as an application that fit the best for a couple of different reasons. And we focused on that. And we've been exclusively in the high school space since then. Recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've expanded outside of streaming, primarily through acquisitions. We're now also have the largest ticketing platform for high school sports. So we also have the largest high school athletic website platform for high school sports. So package all that together. What we're, I'd say, positioned or aiming towards now is to be the all-in-one fan engagement platform for high schools. So what that means in English is we want to work with high schools in a simple, easy to use, comprehensive platform that they can use to make the fan experience better. So is it make it easy for people to buy tickets, make it easy for them to get into the game. If you can't attend a game, make it easy for them to be able to watch and follow the teams that they're interested in after the game, before kind of the full 360 in terms of being a fan of a sport. We want to bring that to the high school market. So people are familiar with this in college and pro. They're excellent at doing it. We want to bring some of those best practices to the high school market.
That is so cool. And I bet that there are people listening right now going, I know this company. I didn't know that I know this company, but I know this company. You guys have reshaped, I think, the high school fan experience, and you've done that really effectively, and largely, I think, probably in a way that people might not know your brand, but they certainly know your product.
Well, to
So
that
yeah,
end,
yeah.
PlayOn Sports is a company name. Very few people know it, or they've heard of it, or they might confuse it with Play It Again Sports, the company
Oh,
where you go and sell it. It's not that.
yeah.
We operate under three distinct brands for consumers today, and that might evolve and change over time. But on the streaming side, it's called the NFHS Network, so it's branded to our partner. The NFHS is the equivalent of the NCAA in college. Um, Under ticketing, it's GoFan. That's the brand that we use. And then we're currently rebranding our school athletic websites. It used to be called VNN, and it's going to be called Play On Sites going forward. But that's even those are branded to the school name. So a lot of people interact with our brands, and typically when you say one of those three, they're like, "Oh yeah, I know it." But very
Yeah.
few people are familiar with Play On Sports. So that's kind of the overarching holding company.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great clarity. And I'm sure you just put on a whole bunch of light bulbs for folks. So what we wanted to talk about today is the idea of hypergrowth. A lot of startups get going and that idea of hypergrowth seems like a dream. In reality, slow, steady, predictable growth is usually simpler. And if you have the patience for it, that's how you lay the groundwork. But you've gone through this. So let's talk about your story. Let's talk about what happened. Where did you hit hypergrowth? And how did you hit hypergrowth?
Yeah, ours may be a little bit atypical from the normal, although I have learned in starting a company, there is no such thing as a normal. But,
Right.
everybody has their own story. So I would say we were pretty typical in terms of the slow, steady growth for, I want to say the first 10 years once we spun it out into an independent company. And we were trying for that hypergrowth. I was, what's it called, looking for the hockey stick all the time. And so I would say most companies or a lot of companies who experience that, typically that happens at some point in the first 5 years. That's probably more normal of when that's at least what you hear out of Silicon Valley. Like that's when
Mm.
you want to find the product market fit and then, hyperscale and throw everything against it. In our case, it came 10 years into the journey after 10 years of, I'd say, going through and kind of systematically proving different elements. So, for us, it was finding the product market fit was first. There was a good bit of experimentation around business model and figuring out the monetization. That took a little bit of time. Um, and then I'd say, the next phase for us was really figuring out unit economics, just making sure that as it scaled, we weren't scaling to losing more money. We were scaling towards actually becoming profitable. And so those are probably the three, kind of, if you put them in mega phases, and they weren't distinct, they overlapped each other. And sometimes you'd have to cycle back on each one. But, as we got more comfortable with each of those, it's again, through that whole time, we'd been trying to find the hyperscale thing, the lever that was going to unlock that. And just never could. And there were two pieces that really unlocked it for us. One was I'll say intentional and by design and strategy, and one was just luck and timing. And they kind of collided, and the result was hyperscale. So
Yeah.
the by design was, again, part of our model is there are games that we produce in the high school market, but then there's the vast majority of games we want the schools to produce. We want them to produce their home. There's 20,000 high schools. I can't get crews and equipment out it's just not, it's not feasible or practical. So we had given schools the tools to produce their own games. And these were typically, high school students who were showing up with camcorders and computers and microphones. And it's awesome. And we still have a
Yeah.
bunch of games produced that way.
Yeah.
It's also extremely unpredictable. So we would have let's say a Friday night football game that looked like a good matchup and the school was going to produce it and we would market it and promote it. And then Friday night would come and the game wouldn't be there. And so Monday morning we'd, make some calls and what happened. And it was, excuses I've heard. I broke up with my girlfriend. So, I forgot the power cord. I had a lot of homework. It was really cold outside. Again,
High school.
I probably used all that when I was 14, 18 years old as well. So,
Of
but very
course.
unpredictable. And then the other challenge we had is we never could get schools on average to produce more than 20 games per school. Some schools did, but the average, we never could move off of 20. And the capacity is around 100 games per school. So after trying everything possible to motivate schools to produce more games manually and to be more predictable, we finally said, is there an automated technology that we can use to just do this? And so we started looking for technology solutions for it. I think we probably coined the term of what has become, it's now called automated production. And so we started working with a company, this is probably 8 years ago, out of Israel called Pixelot. And there were a couple of other companies that did it. Most of their price points were way too high for what was going to work in high school. But we started introducing that into the high school market, instantly got a very good response. We installed it in 200 schools in the first year. And the big question for us was, all right, we've got a couple of hundred schools over here producing 20 games a year manually, and we've got 200 schools over here producing 100 games in an automated fashion. It's different quality. It's a different consumer experience. How are those schools going to compare? Does the automated do better, worse, the same? That was our big question. And we all had our hypotheses, but we didn't know. And so as we started understanding the unit economics of that, one thing we realized looking at the numbers is schools that had two of these Pixelot units, one on the football field, which covers not only football, but then you get the spring sports like soccer and lacrosse, and then one in the gym. So you not only get boys and girls basketball, but volleyball and wrestling. Those schools did more than twice as well as schools that had one unit. And so the first, natural question, this is not unique to this. When you look back on it, it's kind of common sense. He said, well, should we give the second unit away? Does that make sense? Like a buy one, get one. Like it's a good marketing sales tool, but also looks like the math's going to work. So we did that math and the math worked. And so we introduced that to the market and demand shot up, which naturally led to, should we just take all the friction out and give them away for free? Like, does that make sense? And so we ran the math and the math made sense. It was a pretty compelling, a great IRR, pretty quick payback. I was pretty reluctant to pull the trigger on that, though, because I said, what happens if 5,000 schools take us up on that offer? Because the upfront investment per school is about $10,000, maybe a little bit more. So I said, I didn't have to go to Georgia Tech to do that math. That's $50 million. We don't have $50 million on the balance sheet. I don't want to go raise $50 million. So we were a little hesitant in terms of just what happens if you hit this hyperscale. Are we going to be ready, not only from a capital standpoint, are we going to be ready from an operations standpoint?
Yeah.
So that was, and then the ultimate thing. So that was the being prepared. We had found this technology. We'd introduced it systematically into the market. We knew there was a good fit. We knew that it worked. We had tested some of this. If you discount it, does that drive demand? And it did. And, we knew that if we took all the friction out, we would have a surge in demand. Just we weren't certain how big that surge would be. The luck part, which is going to be weird, positioning this as luck, was COVID. So COVID shut our business down like everybody else's. High school sports came, we're recording this in late February. It was right around this time. It came to a screeching halt in mid-March, which is actually one of our biggest times of the year. We're right in basketball playoffs and championships. And the lights got turned off on high school sports in the matter of a couple of days, just like everywhere else. So we went from having thousands of live events in a week to zero. And so I thought it was going to be the end of the company. As it turned out, it was the next phase of the company. And so we were, after we figured out, hey, this isn't going to be 1 to 2 weeks. This is going to last a little bit longer. What are we going to do? I'd say the good thing about sitting around at home with nothing to do is you have some time to think. So I kind of said, the whole world is going in one direction and pulling back. Like, what if we didn't? Like, what if I don't know. This is back to what I said earlier. I've always kind of been a little bit more on the risk side of things. So if everyone's going in one direction, I always think about what if we went the other direction. And so um, I said, what if we did give away those? We have that plan. It made sense. And I said, obviously, it'd be contingent on schools coming back. But if we get an indication that schools are coming back in the fall, what if we took that plan and just repositioned it a little bit? This is our way of giving back to high schools as a way to help them recover from COVID. Because what was going to be clear is if schools did come back in session and they played sports, there were going to be some attendance restrictions, or there were going to be people who were fearful of going into larger venues like this. So my hunch was streaming was going to go in the high school market, was going to go from nice to have to must have. That was my hunch. And so I kind of loosely pulled all this together, and I called Mark Buffington at BIP and kind of walked him through my theory and just said, Mark, it's weird. Is like everybody else is pulling back, and this is going the opposite direction. And he's like, Dave, we've been at it 10 years. Like, let's go do it. So that was about as educated of the decision as we made. Mark said if we did it and we got a big surge, he would help me figure out the capital side of things. So I focused on it, and we pulled the team together. Again, it was nice to have a big project to work on in the middle of COVID. And so about 2 weeks later, we took that to market, that offer, and it was not too much different than what I just described. Maybe the marketing folks probably polished it up just a little bit. And we went, at the time, we were working with about 2,200 of the 10,000 high schools. And within 2 months, that number jumped up to 6,000. So it took, the way I would say it is, what our version of hyperscale, it took us 10 years to get to 2,000 high schools, and then it took us 2 months to get to 6,000.
To triple it, my gosh.
So it was the classic example of the dog who got, it was everyone kept telling me it's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
But it was still a problem. It was a really, really big challenge from that point forward.
Yeah, you caught the bus. Well,
Yep.
It sounds like to me, just to pause for a moment and reflect on a couple of things that I've heard you say. One is the role of data in helping you to make decisions. I mean, clearly you all are watching and making informed decisions. At the same time, I've heard you say the phrase, what if, probably 20 times in a matter of 20 minutes. And so this concept of just consistently asking and acting on your hunches, but using data to sort of assure a direction, sounds like a really powerful combination. Has that, you caught the bus, right? Were you prepared for the pace of change, given that you'd spent 10 years asking what if, gathering data, acting on your hunches? Were you ready?
We thought we were, but we weren't even remotely close to it. And to your point about the data and the hunches, I think successful it's a mix of art and science.
Of course.
I don't think you can just be totally hunch. I also don't think you can be totally data. I've seen too many people get paralyzed trying to make the perfect decision. And my style and what I've counseled people is like, have a theory, be as prepared as you can, but then you got to put it into the market and see how the market responds to it. And then you've got to be very nimble to adjust from there, including like sometimes you have to say, I was wrong, or sometimes you have to say, wow, I was right. And I was even more right than I thought I was going to be. So now how do we reallocate resources to go after it? So that was a little bit the case here. Again, we had a hunch.
Yeah.
I had no idea what the response was going to be. And I would say, so, I'll go back to your question, were we prepared? I'm going to make an excuse. We were also doing this in the middle of COVID. So we were all working remotely. That made it really, really challenging. Like, I think this would have been hard if we'd all been in kind of a classic office environment like we were before and like we are more now. But doing it remotely and all that coordination and communication, we also had to staff up really aggressively in that time frame. So, what the way I tell people in the story of PlayOn is pre-COVID or leading into COVID, we had probably 75 full-time employees. I knew everybody's name. I knew what they did. And I rightly or wrongly, felt like in a pinch, I could step into anybody's role for a minute if needed. If someone was out for whatever, I could do it. Pretty quickly, we jumped to 125, 150 employees. None of those people I ever met face to face before we hired them or even 6 months, a year into it. So, and a lot of them were remote. They weren't in Atlanta. So that was super challenging. I would say the second thing is we thought we knew what entailed scale, and we thought it was just do what we've been doing and repeat it. It is different. There are different skills you need. There's different positions that you need. There's different expertise that you need. So the one example I've told a lot of people about was I'd heard of supply chain before. I mean, I've heard it. I've read articles about it. The supply chain's messed up here, and that we were living it through. You couldn't get toilet paper or whatever it was that was messing up. All of a sudden, we had to become experts in supply chain because we had to get all this. There's a hardware component. We had to get, and it's got to get into the country, and the ports were messed up, and we were dealing with volume that was 2 to 3 times anything we'd ever experienced before. So it was. The best example I can give for hyperscale is it's what it's like when someone tells you what it's like to be a parent. Or when you read a book about being a parent versus actually being a parent. Yes, there are things that are similar, but you don't really get it till you live it.
Yeah, the reality of it is different. So you kind of mentioned the marketplace and you had great product market fit before all of this happened. How did the pace of growth and change sort of force you to alter your thought about product market fit?
Yeah, I just thought it was a multiplier. I mean, I thought if you were doing, if you need 2 times as many people, or you'd need 2 times as many, whatever. And it's actually, if you apply that approach, it's actually an exponential equation, which means throwing people and the existing process at it actually only makes it worse. Like you actually have no other choice in the short term, but you've got to apply systems, processes, technology this is not just about saving money and finding efficiency, but to actually make it scale. So, what we ended up doing was racing from biggest problem to biggest problem. At first it was supply chain. Like that was one of the first. We had to figure out how to get these pieces of equipment manufactured, exported, imported, and distributed to our schools. The second thing is, all right, now I've got to find a national network of installers to put these up in schools. Like, how do we do that? So we raced to figure that thing out. All right, now these things are up. We've got to have a team here to calibrate them and support them. So how do we take our internal support staff from 15 people to that quickly grew to over 100 people that was supporting that. So again, each time we were throwing manual solutions and people at it. I don't think there was another option given the time frame we were working under, but it broke. It broke. Like it was the analogy I've used is we were slapping duct tape on something, and eventually the duct tape gives out, and the duct tape gave out eventually.
Yeah. So, I'm thinking about the math that you were talking about earlier, where you were kind of doing the financial math on providing hardware. And now, you're doing a very different kind of calculus. At what point did you go from chasing growth and keeping up to harnessing growth and using it strategically like you are now?
It was about a 2-year process of chasing. And that was just we didn't stop at 6,000 schools. That's what happened in the first couple of months. That quickly grew to 9,000. I think we're in the 10,000 range now. So that continued. Yeah, like we chased that growth for 2 years.
Okay.
I think we started to see the first cracks appear about a year and a half in, something like that. Once you had a chance just to catch your breath slightly. But again, we were still growing so fast. And by the way, the awesome part about this is just the numbers take off. I mean, the company's financial profile completely. We went from, we 4X'd revenue in under 2 years. So that's amazing. And the
That is
company went
amazing.
from marginally profitable to very, I mean, just,
Yeah.
that's the fun part, is when you look at the output and the financials and you're like, wow,
We did this.
we didn't just beat budget. Like our budget was 50 million and we just did 70 million in revenue.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah.
But there was a whole bunch of lead up and work that was extremely challenging.
Yeah.
And then you just knew on the backside of it, like there was going to be a penalty to pay for that hypergrowth and for the shortcuts that we took. So, I would say it was 2 years of chasing the growth. It was about a year then to identify where the biggest fault, like what we needed to go address and fix and change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only been, that may be generous of a year. It may have been a little bit longer than that to really identify those and fix those. And it's really only in the last 2 to 3 years we've been able to capitalize on the new position. Like now, all right, now we are half the high school market. We're streaming 700,000 games a year. Yeah. What else could we potentially do with this asset we have?
There's that question again. What if? Yeah. I love it. It's great. So, as we begin to sort of wrap up, you've obviously learned a tremendous amount through the gift of this experience. I mean, as difficult as I'm sure sometimes were, this is a really wonderful experience. So, I think the question that a lot of listeners probably have is, what advice do you have for startups that are pursuing high growth?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit. I listened to the How I Built This podcast. I've listened to it forever with Tyrod. Probably everyone on here does. And he always ends with what percent is luck and what percent is hard work. And, so I won't answer it. I won't give away my answer to that question. But as it
saving it for Roz.
There's a part of hypergrowth that is luck. Mm-hmm. Now, you have to be as well prepared as possible for when that moment of luck shines on your company to be able to capitalize on it. And that is typically years of work leading into it, to whether it's the technology or the business model or the go-to-market team or the marketing or whatever the components are that allow you to, when that moment comes, to take advantage of it. I would say my advice for when it happens, ride it as long as you can. Like, have a plan, sure. Always have a plan. The plan is going to be worthless the next day. I mean, it is just so all-encompassing. If you try to stick with the plan you imagine at the start, you're going to miss the opportunity. Like, just ride the growth, adjust as best as you can. Make the best decisions you can at the time. Whatever you mess up, you can fix on the back. Most times you can fix it on the backside. But you've got to be willing. Let me. I'm gonna make one statement before I say you got to be willing. I think the best thing our company did is we never saw that growth we had as it proved how smart we were, or proved we were right.
Stay humble.
There was a point, like, it was amazing. It was fun. It was all, this was a kind of a tight-knit group with a bunch of new folks around us who were working a ton, all hours of the day, to get the job done. So I think everybody knew it was hard work, but I think everybody also acknowledged we got lucky. Like, we happened to have the right product at the right time when an external force happened. So what that allowed us to do is, when we got on the other side of it, we could quickly identify, like, hey, we're not the smartest people in the room, and we made plenty of mistakes as we went along. And there's some fundamental stuff that we've got to fix. So I think it was not hard for us to repivot into fixing that stuff. I think where it can get hard is if you think like, oh, wow, look, this was easy and we fixed it. Look how great we are. No one manages that hypergrowth phase perfectly. There's too many things. There's too many skill sets. So I think you said it well, like, be humble on the backside and acknowledge that there was a lot of work that you did to get to that point, but there was also an element of luck that allowed that to happen at that moment. And there's probably going to be quite a bit of cleanup of mistakes you made during that phase.
Yeah. Well, to sort of quote, Jim Collins, I think that you were prepared for the who luck and the when luck and, all of those different forms of luck that came to you because you were ready for them. And it sounds like that was that infrastructure was already and always there.
I will say one other thing. I think that
Yeah.
helped us is because, again, our journey is probably atypical of this. 10 years of linear growth followed by 2 years of hyperscaling. We knew our customers really well.
Yeah. Smart.
So, and like that was so I think like if some hyperscaling like this had happened a lot earlier, we didn't really know 2 years in how schools worked and what they needed and what was important to them. So I do think that helped us in that 2 years of hyperscale where we could talk to our schools in a way of saying like, hey, we know you need this solution now. We just don't have it, but like we got some on the plane and the next one that lands, it's going to be at your door and we'll have an installer there. So I do think when it comes later in the company's existence, it does give you a little bit of advantage of being able to know that whatever the customer base is that you're serving, you've got a much better feel and profile for how to meet their needs and how to talk to them when things don't go according to plan.
Yeah. No, I think that is such a sage observation. And, I think as we close, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is what did you wish you had known when you first started as an entrepreneur? And, I think we've prefaced it by saying you spent a lot of time learning what you needed to know. But, going all the way back to the start, what do you wish you had known?
If I had known it, I wouldn't have done it. So
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
No, I mean, you can't, I've got my answer is consistent. I had no idea the emotional toll it takes.
Oh, sure.
I was fully prepared for the hard work. And a little bit of the experience, leadership is lonely. That's a piece of it. Entrepreneurship is lonely.
Yes.
And you can be surrounded by other but like you're still on your own journey, even if, because like we were in ATDC. So I don't know, 30 other companies around us, like all in a similar stage and journey, but it's still lonely. So where I say on the emotional side is you feel such a tremendous burden. And some of it is to deliver for yourself and your family and the pride and the ego that goes with that. But, as you go from 5 employees to 15 to 50, like you feel a burden for them. Like you don't want to fail. You've taken money from investors. You don't want to fail for them. So it continues, the emotional pressure burden continues to stack. And for me, that it still hasn't gone away, but like I didn't feel any of that weight shift until we had the exit a couple of years ago. Like that was probably the first time I felt like I could like breathe in 12, 15, I don't know how many years it was. So again, I think if someone had told me, it wouldn't have dissuaded. I think if I had truly known it, it would have, I counsel a lot of people who are thinking about, and this is what I talk to them about is like, I can't explain it to you. I can't have you're not going to experience it, but it's like, you're going to have to trust me. Like you're going to have to be prepared. The highs are so much higher. The lows are so much lower. And this is not a sprint. This lasts a long time. Carrying that emotional weight for that period of time takes a real toll.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really, really, it's a really wise observation. And I think anyone listening who's ever been in a startup, regardless of size, can tell you, those 2 a.m., I'm still working, you feel like you're the only one in the world who's doing it. And then you add, employees and a rapidly growing employee base and a family and all of that other, all of those other responsibilities and investors. It's actually really wonderful to hear that would be the thing that would give you pause, because what it says to me about you is that you're not just an entrepreneur, but you're a very caring business owner. And that's a wonderful thing. And it probably has contributed to your growth. So thank you for sharing your story and being so honest and transparent. Is there anything you want to leave us with? And if not, where can we learn more about PlayOn and your family of brands?
Yeah, I think the best place for that, we do have a corporate web, playonsports.com, and that links out to the products. As I mentioned, it's NFHS Network is a streaming product, and that's available on not only the web, but all the streaming devices. So there's an iOS app and a Roku and an Apple TV app and all that stuff. GoFan is the ticketing. Hopefully people are using GoFan. I bump into more people now that know us from using the GoFan. I used it last night to go to my daughter's soccer game.
Yep.
But yeah, corporate information is available there. And we've got some exciting announcements coming soon.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
Additional products and services that we'll be rolling out in 2025 to continue to complete that fan experience journey that we want to have for high school fans.
Well, that is super exciting. And we'll make sure that we add all of those links in the show notes so that people can follow along and keep up. And I will say, as we are signing off, that I have been familiar with your brands, both as a user and just, working with the company for a long time. And I mean, GoFan's amazing. And NFHS is so great. I have a nephew who's in Florida and I'm in Atlanta, and I get to, watch him compete now and then. And it's really pretty cool. So thank you for what you do. I think you've definitely connected people in the way that you had hoped at the start. So appreciate you joining us today, David. Thanks so much for tuning in to Extraordinary Pursuits. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like and share the show. It helps others to find us. Now, let's go build the future of the innovation economy.